them in place to keep us in chains. By show of hands, who else is sick and tired of the same 1%, trying to keep us small, trying to keep us from getting out, minimizing the struggles they've caused, saying we're not working hard enough.
We really should stop this fighting. Otherwise, we'll miss the fireworks.
There won't be any fireworks.
And here we go.
Hey everybody, it's Derek. Welcome to Sucker Podcast. No crazy intro today, just a somber welcome. So let me give you a little bit of a backstory on something that's going on here. So I recorded the episode that I'm about to air for you guys now on Monday morning. And I made a slight error on the intro and called the company by the wrong name. And so I had to re-record the intro this morning, or this afternoon, whatever, to be able to put out today. Well, about 1 o'clock this afternoon, today is Wednesday, by the way, I got out of bed because I was just having a lazy day. It was raining and just having a lazy day. And get out of bed, and I noticed my cat is, his name's Miles, was not looking well at all. And I scooped him up, and I started to run downstairs and put my shoes on to go to the vet. And on my way down the stairs, he died in my arms. So that completely fucking just killed my mojo. That little guy was fucking everything. I mean, I loved him just as much as I love my daughters. He was my little boy. I mean, that guy was my little lion. He was just awesome. He was a fucking great fucking cat. And I love that guy so fucking much. He passed away in my arms, which, you know, in hindsight was probably the best thing for him because he was laying on my daughter's bathroom floor, and I'm sure he wouldn't have wanted to have died there. And he died in my arms on my way out the door, or on the way down the stairs. And it completely just fucking killed me. So I called my ex-wife and I told her what was going on because my daughter Izzy's not here. And we talked about it for a while, and I decided to drive to the closest vet and drop him off there to be cremated. And that was really, really fucking hard on me, obviously. I got back home and I just sat in my driveway, letting the rain hit my car for, God, an hour. I didn't even want to go back inside. You know, fur babies are just as important as, you know, human beings in some cases. And that little guy was a lot for me. He was, whenever I was having a down day, whenever I was having a really bad, you know, depression day, that little guy was there for me. You know, he never left my side. He slept with me every night. He was just a great fucking cat, and I'm gonna miss the fuck out of him. But it's now 8:15 at night. I'm finally got the courage to get out of bed and come downstairs to my studio to record this this intro for the LGBTQ Task Force, excuse me. The LGBT, I can't even talk. For the LGBTQ Task Force. If you guys remember back last year in June, I spoke to a lady by the name of Julie Childs. She works for them as well. We talked about her kids and how they're non-binary, and they're all the stuff that they have to go through and stuff like that. And now I'm talking to a lady by the name of Cathy Renna, who is the communications director for the LGBTQ Task Force. We're talking about trans rights and the Equality Act and all the different things that are going on in other states such as Arkansas and Mississippi and Florida and all these other states. I think South Dakota's in there as well, North Dakota, and all the different things that they have going on that are kind of counteracting what the federal government is doing, and there's a lot going on with that. And being that today is Trans Visibility Day, I thought today would be a great opportunity to put this episode out. And it's going to be up a little bit late, because of the circumstances, obviously. But today's just been a hard day. And I wanted to make sure that I did the right introduction for Cathy and the LGBTQ Task Force. But at the same time, I wanted to come out here and pour my heart out because of what Miles meant to me. And I knew he wouldn't want me to be in bed all day, sombering over, everything and not putting on a show because of it. Cats, dogs, your animals know what you love. And he knew I loved him, and he knew I loved what I do here. And I know he would want me to be happy, so I found the courage to get out of bed and come downstairs and do this introduction. It is not exactly the way I wanted this to go down, but it is what it is. Yeah. So, Miles, I love you. You are the fucking best cat in the goddamn world, man. I wish I had more time with you. I really fucking do. But the show must go on. So here is my episode with the communications director of the LGBTQ Alliance, Miss Cathy Renna.
Doing great. How are you?
I've been better, but things are good. Not too shabby. Crap has been kind of hitting the ceiling lately.
Yes, indeed.
Now, this is kind of twofold in my eyes, and you might see it differently. For the first time in a long time, in my opinion, the focus hasn't so much been on being gay or lesbian or anything else. It's now just focusing strictly on the trans rights, which I guess is a step in the right direction, or maybe it's just a black cloud, quote unquote, over that, and there's just something to replace that right now. But either way, what's going on is very, very negative, and it's really horrible because like last night, I was just browsing through Facebook, and a gentleman posted into one of our community groups that we're on that he's pissed off at the state of Virginia because they're starting to allow boys to play girls sports and all this other stuff, and he's gonna run because this is disgusting. I don't want a boy in the girls' locker rooms, and it's like, oh my god, really? And it's getting out of hand. So if you could do me a favor and kind of explain in layman's terms what the federal government has done with the Equality Act and what it means for us.
So that's a lot of things to unpack. I mean, I think to address your first observation around the tax on the trans community, those have been happening for a while. They are things that the, organized, advocacy organizations have been talking about for a long time, whether it's the epidemic of hate violence against trans women, particularly trans women of color, and what we're seeing increasingly, which are attacks on trans youth and adolescents. And as someone who has worked for many, many, many years, longer than, when this was like a blip on the radar of the anti-LGBTQ organizations, I know trans youth and adolescents, and I am extremely pained and angry and motivated to do something about these attacks. I think that part of it is a natural progression, the fact that they know they're losing on gay and lesbian issues. And the polling shows that, and increasingly they're losing on trans issues. So, finally they had to, in some ways, very tactically start to attack part of our community, which is a new and emergingly visible, community for those of us within the queer rights movement, especially children. And so, I think there are many reasons why this is happening. Part of it is that the other side's losing. Part of it is that trans and non-binary youth and adolescents are increasingly visible. I have a 15-year-old daughter. She has, trans and non-binary friends. I have a niece who dated a trans boy for a while. Like, these kids are, if you look at the recent Gallup polling that came out, we have a generation coming up that is much more fluid and much more not super identity based around both sexual orientation and gender identity. And I think that scares a lot of people. The tactic of going after trans youth is one that is, it's insidiously smart and somewhat effective, exactly for the reasons that you were saying. That person said, oh, I don't want, boys playing girl sports, because people don't know a lot about trans children. They know more about trans adults. And that's why they, increasingly are abandoning this whole bathroom issue of the bills that would, try and block trans folks from using the correct bathroom for their gender identity, or the one that correlates to their gender identity. So they're going after kids. And, again, what we're seeing, which I'm very happy about, is we're seeing folks within our larger LGBTQ community rise up. And we're also, I see it as an opportunity to educate and debunk myths. Unfortunately, we're doing it in the context of fighting, literally a couple of dozen statewide bills that are very, very harmful. I mean, there are two just passed in Arkansas, one that would effectively ban trans girls from participating in sports K through 12, which is ridiculous. But the other one, which is, I think, even more harmful, which is allowing medical professionals and healthcare professionals to deny services and care to trans youth and their families, because they doesn't fit with their beliefs, or doesn't fit with, how they want to do their job, or, basically the legal right to discriminate.
Yeah. And what's funny about that one is, because that was signed, if I'm not mistaken, federally last June by President Trump, on a federal level too. That's where he's saying that could happen, which in hindsight, well, not even hindsight, I mean, it was obvious then. That was a huge slap in the face to the trans and LGBTQ community, because it was done during Pride Month. Yeah, so that was, even worse. But, everyone, all the Trumplicans are always like, he's so pro-gay, pro-LGBTQ, but yeah, he does that kind of stuff. But whatever, I digress. But what gets me is, and maybe you can explain this a little bit better, how can the federal government say that this is allowed, but states come down and say, hey, nope, never mind, not in our state?
It's very much like we did when we fought for marriage equality. Until we went to the Supreme Court and won two cases, the Obergefell case and the Windsor case. And Edie Windsor was my client. I had the chance to work with her, and she was amazing. And, she knew she had to take it to the Supreme Court, because what we ended up having was a patchwork across the country. I could be married in one state and then, take a 6-hour drive and suddenly not be legally married anymore. And your zip code should not, be the thing that on which, your equality depends, right? So I think we're seeing a similar thing with these attacks on trans communities. So that's why the Equality Act is incredibly important, because it would, of course, give us federal protections for the first time. I think a lot of people don't realize that we don't have these protections, even within our own community. I mean, I think there's a tremendous amount of public education that needs to happen. And the polling bears this out, that a lot of folks, queer or not, seem to think, well, they have marriage equality, they must be fine. When in fact, we don't have protections in dozens of states when it comes to employment or housing or jury service, accommodations, all of these areas where, you could ironically legally get married on Saturday, post some pictures on social media, on Sunday and then go into work Monday and get fired legally, which is absolutely ridiculous and astounding. And so I think the more we tell those stories, the more we make it really clear. We've got Wednesday is Transgender Day of Visibility, March 31st.
Correct.
And we decided in putting together an event with a coalition of other organizations, HRC, the National Center for Lesbian Rights, we decided to create a platform for trans and non-binary youth because they're tired of being talked about and talked at. They want to be able to tell us their stories and talk about their experiences. And, that's been incredibly important. I think the Senate hearing for the Equality Act was really mixed bag because some of the things we heard were just like horrifying. And I kept thinking, oh, set your watch back 25 years, given some of the things they were saying. And then they were all repetitive. You could have replaced trans with gay and you would have been hearing similar arguments, 15 years ago. Religion was being weaponized like it has been for hundreds of years historically. But what I thought was really amazing was that a 16-year-old trans girl was one of our witnesses, and that the mother of a trans child who is a pastor and lives in Kansas was one of our other witnesses to really put a face on this, to really show people what the reality is, because they're not seeing it in the media or in their public lives as much as they see the rest of our community.
Yeah. I watched that hearing, little bits of it. And anything that Marjorie Taylor Greene says is completely, just ignorant. So we're not even going to talk about her. But two things. Number one, this episode will air on Wednesday, so which I'm doing on purpose. Number one. Number two, what I find inherently wrong with this argument is a couple different things, all kind of centered around females in general. Okay. Number one, as a father to 3 daughters. Okay. Number one, I know that my girls are just as strong, if not stronger, and more and capable, if not more capable, than any boy out there. Any boy, regardless of trans or not. And if they want to compete, in a sport that has trans girls in it,
mm-hmm.
more power to them, because I know that my girls are going to whoop some shit. That's how they are. So that argument right there, in my opinion, is sexist by nature. Saying that women are
all of this is rooted in sexism and misogyny.
Absolutely.
It's really sad and it's tired. I mean, and the other thing is it's such a red herring. Like, the sky is falling, women's sports will be destroyed is ludicrous. Because first of all of a sudden they're concerned about women and sports. These are folks who didn't vote for the Violence Against Women Act and didn't vote for funding for women's sports or Title IX or whatever. Yeah. And the truth is there's no there. I mean, the media are doing as good a job as they can. David Crary from the Associated Press did a phenomenal article and, searched far and wide, found like one case of a trans girl, sort of, wiping the floor with, some of her competitors. You could say the same thing about Michael Phelps. At that age, it's not about like the physicality. Like, they're just lying. They're just lying about the experience of trans children and adolescents, and not just the personal part, but the biology of it, of the medical part of this. And again, like I said, I've had a tremendous amount of experience with this. I've worked with Gender Odyssey and Gender Cool and a ton of organizations that work with children and adolescents. They talk about surgery and medical procedures and hormones, and none of that happens until they're well past puberty and old enough to be making these decisions.
Correct.
So it's really just scare tactics. It's really just lies and misinformation and myth. And it's essentially the very, it's like they have one playbook and they can't, find another, and they just insert a different word here or there. And the nuance here is that they are, like I said, talking about a part of our community. And these kids are they're not just our future, as I find it often patronizing that people say that. These kids are doing stuff now. This panel that we're working on, we have one kid, she reaches 2.5 million people on TikTok. Like, they're not joking around. They want their stories told. They want to reach their friends and their peers and other trans and non-binary kids who may not be in as good a situation as they are, that are super isolated. Because the problem is, like that hearing is a great example, but the media in general, I know so many parents of trans children who really have to work hard to limit their kids from the toxicity and the aggression and the just blatant hostility and lies that they hear about themselves, because that's really damaging to these kids. And I'm talking
absolutely.
about regular kids, never mind the kids that I know who deal with media, work with media. They know they're more resilient. They've got family support. They don't read the comments. They ignore the trolls. But I'm thinking about the kids that are out there who are, sitting on their phone, talking to their friends, and then something pops up on, Facebook or TikTok. They're not on Facebook. They're on TikTok or Instagram. I have a 15-year-old. She wouldn't be on Facebook if you paid her money. She's on Instagram and TikTok. And they see these horrible things. And no matter how self-assured you are, we all internalize it on some level. And that to me is the real danger here, especially, these bills at the state level. Awful.
Yeah. Well, what I think is also a huge danger, and again, not in the physical sense, but just in the mental sense, is that one of the things that I've noticed, and I could be wrong, but one of the things I've noticed is that most of these bills at the state level are just saying trans girls can't compete in girls sports. They make no mention about trans boys competing in boys sports. So the argument can kind of go the both ways. So if you really truly care about girls, okay, or cis girls, or how, whatever, you kind of go around, understand where I'm going with. So you don't care about that trans girl, that trans boy that's going to play in boys sports now. You don't care about, the fact that she or he's weak. You know what I'm saying? But the boy that's going over there, don't mess with our girls, but you can play with our boys. That's fine.
Again, it's patronizing, it's sexism, it's misogyny, it's stereotype, because of course, that boy used to be, in their parlance, a girl. Mm-hmm. So why take that child seriously? It's so transparent, and it's so pathetically superficial, and it doesn't hold up.
It doesn't.
At that Senate hearing, you look at the witnesses they brought in; they're terrible. And they all started off with this very patronizing. Well, I don't think anyone should be discriminated against, but if we let this happen, and we're talking about the Equality Act here, we're not talking about particularly, specific trans legislation, but they have no argument for any of the other parts of it. So they have to go to their one always go to, which is, religion, we're going to weaponize religion. And when in fact it's, long history of that, whether you're talking about suffrage or slavery or so many other things that religion has been used to justify in terms of discrimination, or they're targeting, again, this really not so large group of kids where there just hasn't been enough visibility. And, the idea that what was the phrase was something like, it's going to ruin women's sports. Megan Rapinoe had a phenomenal op-ed in the Washington Post this weekend, where she said, do you think this is the problem? I've been an athlete my whole life. It's not the problem. The problem is women's sports don't get the funding they deserve, the media attention they deserve, the support they deserve. And, again, if you ever see the salary comparisons of female athletes and male athletes on a professional level, it's ludicrous. It's disgusting. So those are the issues with women's sports that it'd be interesting to see if they support any of those things. No, all they care about is, trans girls playing sports in middle school, where I know tons of trans girls who play sports in middle school, and they play just fine. They play field hockey or volleyball or cheer or do whatever. And, and they want to do it for the same reason their friends do. They want to be part of something bigger. They learn all kinds of wonderful social and leadership skills. It builds self-esteem. I mean, it's like, again, I have a 15-year-old and she's an artist. She's not an athlete, but I couldn't imagine, she's not threatened by having friends who want to participate in these activities who happen to be trans.
So let me go ahead and play devil's advocate for a second. And again, this is not something I agree with. This is strictly devil's advocate stuff. So over the last couple weeks, I saw a couple of reports out of England talking about how let's take the kids out for a moment here. That after 2 years of hormone replacement therapy, there's no biological difference hormonally in a cis man versus a trans man, and vice versa with a cis woman and a trans woman. They were kind of like trying to validate the IOC's rule against saying, hey, you can't compete in an Olympic sport unless you've been on trans therapy for 1 year. But then they're like, hey, wait a second, no, it should be 2 years, blah 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 blah. What if high school sports did something like that? What would that kind of thing do? Because again, it kind of mimics what amateur sports or pro sports are doing, but at the same time, these kids are also going through puberty still, so they shouldn't be having hormone replacement therapy. So if somebody came out with that argument, so if they came out with that argument,
that's again, here we come. Here come the TERFs, right? Here come the folks who claim to be feminists, but are super transphobic, whether it's J.K. Rowling or whether it's Martina Navratilova, frankly. That again, it's a lack of understanding and knowledge. I want to get more medical experts out there, because the reality is at that age, kids are on hormone blockers for some time, so they're delaying puberty actually, right? And then that gives them more time to consider their transition, if they want to transition, how they want to transition. These are all very personal decisions. Some kids will be identifying as non-binary. It's going to be fun to see how folks deal with that and wrap their minds around that, right? On all sides. But the truth is that these are not decisions that are going to get made when kids are in high school, and it's just so sad, because I see the impact that this has on these kids. It's horrible. It's absolutely horrifying. We should be lifting our kids up. We should be encouraging them to be their best selves. We should be teaching them to be accepting and celebratory of the diverse people in their lives. We should not be marginalizing certain kids, and we should certainly not be teaching our other kids to, treat their peers differently because they're different from them. That's what's really at play here. And, all of this denialism and all of this sort of like this, like I call it, like it's the red herring defense. Like they'll find 1 or 2 cases of, a person who's decided to detransition. That happens. No one's denying that happens. But, it really is very anecdotal. What we need is more data and more research. And we are gathering that over time. But again, this is a relatively new issue that we are all dealing with and that we are gathering information on. But at the end of the day, for me, what matters the most is the lived experience of these children and adolescents and young people and teenagers, because I've heard them for years. I know 5-year-olds who've socially transitioned. The difference in that child's face and demeanor and outlook on life prior to transition, when they were miserable and living in a way that made them completely unhappy, uncomfortable, and just, it was just a horrible experience. You see them able to live as their real selves, as who they really are in their hearts. The difference is amazing. The difference is just amazing. And so, I think that's the conversation we really need to start having more of, even within the LGBT community, because, I mentioned Martina Navratilova. There are plenty of women, mostly lesbians, who are part of this TERF movement of, trans exclusionary radical feminists. So trans women aren't women, and all that. And, it's really sad, because I think they haven't really looked at or listened to the lived experience of these women. Of course, I know many, many women, trans women who are adults, and they talk about their experience. At our Creating Change conference in January, we did a panel, and it was just fascinating. It was an intergenerational conversation with trans youth and non-binary elders. And it was just fantastic to hear these young people telling these stories and knowing that they stand on the shoulders of, folks that we had on this panel who were in their 70s and 80s, who couldn't have imagined a world where they could turn on their TV and see Pose, or, any other number of, television programs or see music or go on social media and see themselves and what a difference that makes. So I feel like we have a fight ahead of us. There's no joke. But I think again, it's like, you want to bring this up and talk about it? Let's talk about it. And let's give these young people voice and platform. And when they do, all of that misinformation and lies and disinformation just sort of like will just, disappear into the ether because, as one of my heroes, Emma Gonzalez from the Parkland High School, who's a huge gun control advocate and also part of the community, as she always says, I call BS. And that's what these kids are doing. They're calling BS, and they're right.
Yeah. That is one thing I've noticed a lot of lately, because I've seen it a lot on TikTok, is that that whole, lesbians against, trans women thing. And that was like, that I was taken aback by that, number one. But then when I thought about it, a little bit deeper, it made me think back to however long ago it was, 7, 8 years ago, when Caitlyn Jenner came out and said that she was against gay marriage. As well, I was like, there's so much infighting, in between, whatever happened to LGBTQ rights, and now why is it just got to be L rights or just G rights, or why do we have to have the infighting? And I don't like that either. I mean, it's we got to be banded together, just like outside of this, the whole red versus blue fight right now. Our country is in shambles. We got to stop the infighting in order to be able to fix the bigger problem, and it's the same thing on the LGBTQ front as well.
I totally agree. I mean, this is something I've dealt with for the 30 years I've been doing this work. Just because we're queer, what we're brought together by as a community has nothing to do with our race, our class, our age, our ethnic background, our immigration status, like all of those things. So, so what happens is you have folks who happen to be queer, but who may also bring sexism, racism, transphobia, classism, privilege, white supremacy, all of that. We deal with all of that. And it's hard, makes it, like I always say, our community is a microcosm of the larger culture. That's a challenge. But what's interesting to me is I think what really needs to happen on an individual level. And this is something I can even speak from personal experience as someone, again, who's been involved forever and who had to learn about these things. I had a conversation with a reporter the other day about one of these, about the law in Arkansas. And we started talking about what does it mean to deny medical care to trans kids? And I said, I remember in 1995 when I was a very, fairly new activist and had not done a lot of work around trans issues. I was living in Washington, D.C. And a trans woman named Tyra Hunter was hit by a car and literally lying in the street bleeding out. Trans woman, known in the neighborhood, everybody loved her. First responders show up, start to try and, triage her. I was an EMT, so I won't use all the terminology, but like they cut open her, her pants leg to get access to put in an IV line. They saw that she had been assigned male at birth. They immediately stopped caring for her. They immediately started saying derogatory things about her. And she literally died in the street. That's what happens when transphobia manifests in that way. And people throw out their responsibilities and any first do no harm oaths that they take, whether they're EMTs or surgeons. And this young woman died in the street in front of friends, family, neighbors. And it caused it caused a sea change in visibility of the trans community. We got mobilized. And it made me really look and try to understand these issues better. And I did it by getting to know trans people. I think the issue of lesbians being particularly threatened is very interesting to me. I mean, I've been out, my mother jokes, when I was born, I came out and I came out. I've always been out. I would have to describe myself as probably gender nonconforming, right? As in terms of my, physical appearance. And I think what happened was, historically, we saw a lot of very butch women who just did not understand or see the idea of being trans as a possibility. And what we started to see as we saw more trans visibility and more discussion in the community were women who identified as butch lesbians, but who were really in their heart trans, who really identified as male. And so that was very threatening. At the end of the day, any of this stuff, any of the complaints, any of the prejudice, all the fear, all that, it's based on not knowing and being afraid. And I find if you have these conversations with people and you start to dispel these myths and you start to explain them, you get to know people, that's when you can come to the place where I always like to say, I always joke it's going to be the title of my memoir or what they put on my headstone, although I want to be cremated. I never thought about it that way, because that, if you can get someone to say that about these issues, I never thought about it that way, they can start that journey. And it's a journey. It takes time to really, to understand, all the diverse issues that impact our community. And we've had such great success in so many areas, but we still have a lot of work to do in some. And this one is definitely, one of not just the more challenging one, it's also now a priority because of the attacks like the ones you talked about before.
Yeah. So I want to kind of end the interview on this question, because I've been doing, like I said, I've been doing a lot of talking about this on my previous shows with other people. And one of the arguments that got brought up the other day, and I'm kind of torn on this one, so I want to kind of get your opinion, and maybe you can, pull me one way or the other, is the extremist parents that are going, and this is few and far between, but it's still out there. The parents that are, so, pro LGBTQ, that these children are being born and they're saying, oh, you're not a boy or a girl, you can figure that out later on in life. And they kind of choose non-binary for them right away. What are your opinions on that?
Well, see, I think that's actually, that's not really correct. I would describe it as they're not choosing non-binary. They're choosing non-gendered.
Okay,
There's a big difference. There is big difference,
yes.
As someone who raised a child who was like princesses and butterflies and tulle skirts and, wanted to play princess with me and was like, you can be the prince, mommy. I get it. I know you're not so much into the tiaras. She is now turned into like sort of like a more androgynous goth chick. And she dresses like I did when I was like in my 20s. It's funny. Like, it's about raising children with more options than the extremely gendered boxes that we put kids in. I mean, I tried to offer my daughter everything. Would you like a truck? Truck. I want that princess. All right, fine. But, I also have a 4-year-old niece great niece actually, who, while she loves her Frozen and she loves her, her princessy stuff, and she loves unicorns, which, makes her, very, very much an ally to the queer community, how much she loves pride and unicorns and rainbows. She'll be playing with toys like dolls now, and she will very intentionally say, oh, and this baby doll has 2 mommies, like my cousin Rosemary. Like, kids are taught all of these sort of very super gendered or heterosexist kind of boxes that we put folks in. If you don't teach them that, then you give them the opportunity. Now, it's probably a fairly new phenomena, and it's something people might have to get used to, but like, it's the idea of trying to raise children in a less rigidly gendered world, which I have to say, as a child, I never wanted to have long hair. Once I could verbalize, I was like, I'm not wearing a dress. I wanted trains for Christmas. And my parents were like, okay, that's who you are. That's what makes you smile. That's what makes you happy as a parent. What more could you ask for? So stop buying me, skirts and pocketbooks and start buying me trains and baseball gloves. And I was a happy kid, and I grew up to be a happy adult, a well-adjusted adult who's very comfortable in her own skin. And that's what that's about. It's not, I don't think, you always hear this, like, parents are like forcing this kind of stuff on their kids. Kids will rebel anyway. Kids may or may not listen. But I think offering children choices, you know, is really what that's about. And it's really I think it's a wonderful thing for parents of all kinds. I know we have my wife and I have one of her older nephews. They're having their second child, but their first child, who was born female, she's like, she's a real mix. She'll wear her Frozen dress, and then she wants to like have tattoos like daddy and draw like skulls on her arm,
Yeah.
And she's rough and tumble, but then she's also like, cute and wants to get all dressed up. Like, you have to just let kids be kids,
Correct. Yeah.
and not try and restrict them.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was kind of like, a little bit on the fence about this one, was because, I raised all my daughters as, girls, obviously. But like my 10-year-old, that little girl is so androgynous, it's not even funny. I mean, it's, she chose that on her own. It wasn't anything that, I forced on or anything else like that, but like in 7th grade, she was the girl that went to, not 7th grade, when she was 7 years old. She's the one who went to Spring Picture Day in a black and gold Star Wars dress with her hair done up like, Princess Leia. I'm like, and with just stormtroopers all over her dress. I'm like, okay, that's what you want. That's what you got, and I had to one day order that from Amazon in order to get it for her, because that's what she wanted. But like my only concern with, raising a child, deliberately non-gender to have them choose later on in life is the parents that are doing it in a non-educational way. And let me explain what I mean by that. Because at some point they're going to, a little girl is going to, someone who's born a little girl but raised non-gender is going to come home and be like, hey, why am I not a girl? But like there's other girls at my school who have this or that, whatever, can you explain that to me? And they don't. And that's kind of where my concern is, because I know, but I just know the mentality of some parents, they're so hard on their beliefs that they wouldn't explain that. Like, you can figure it out on your own. And that's my only argument with that. I know that's gonna be a small percentage to it, but that's like, yeah. And that's my only, like, if you're going to do that, make sure you do it right. These are boys, these are girls,
exactly.
you choose.
Raising your child non-gendered means offering your child all the different options. It doesn't mean saying, wear a potato sack and you can't have any gender. You don't express your gender, any gender of any kind at all. Like, that's just not real. I think that's not realistic. If kids are just not gonna, they're not gonna take that. And they start verbalizing, like, they know. Yeah. Like, there's also this very interesting, I mean, again, having worked with so many children, like, kids start verbalizing at 2 and 3 and 4. They know who they are on the inside. And that's why I'm so glad to see that so many more parents are listening when a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old says, I'm not a boy, I'm a girl, or I don't always feel like a boy. Sometimes I feel like a girl. Like, parents, the job of a parent is to listen. You listen to your child, you learn from your child, you accept your child, you love them unconditionally, and you support them in any way you can. And you give them the space to be themselves. That, to me, is what you need to do as a parent. Like I said, trying to put them into either a specific box, or, frankly, as you're kind of saying, no box at all. That's a decision that kids make when they get older. Because I know plenty of adolescents who are like, I don't want to check off a box. I'm super not into, like, my identity is very fluid. It's the kind of philosophy that we see in Native American cultures when we talk about two-spirit people. Those who do very much embody both male and female, whether it's physical, emotional, personal characteristics. And in knowing folks in the two-spirit community, it's an incredibly beautiful and freeing thing to see that kind of gender fluidity and that kind of gender diversity being so accepted. In fact, not just accepted, but revered.
Yeah.
These are seen as individuals who are, the marriage counselors, in tribes. These are the folks who, if a child is orphaned, that is where that child goes, because then that child is going to grow up in a completely, accepting, open environment and just be who they are. that's that's where I wish we could end up, and hopefully someday we'll get there. I have a lot of hope given the young people that I talk to now that that's very much a direction that they're going, in a more sort of nuanced, sophisticated way to look at gender and gender diversity the same way we talk about sexual orientation. Like, it's not just gay and straight, for goodness sakes. I mean, I was a biology major, so as Monica Helms, who designed the trans flag, she says all the time, I love her. She's such a great person. She says, Mother Nature knows there are no binaries. Human nature thinks everything is binary. And she's absolutely right, because people want it to be easy. They want things to be black or white. They don't like the gray. And the reality is the vast majority of us live in the gray, especially in the queer community.
Yeah, the gray is a great place to live in all honesty.
Exactly. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else.
Yeah, so I think we hit on all the points that I wanted to hit on today.
Awesome.
And I really appreciate you coming on and talking about all this.
Sure.
Because it's such an important thing, because I'm my 19-year-old is queer. And on her 18th birthday, the month after she came out, her and I went and got matching, gay pride tattoos. So I have one myself. Because that's the type of father I am.
Cool.
But it's,
That's awesome.
Yeah, I love my tattoo. I mean, it's fantastic. It's it says love in the rainbow. But it's one of those things where it needs to be focused on right now, because there's so many other people focusing on it in a negative. We need to have people out there, focusing on it in the positive. And I've done many shows about LGBTQ rights in general. I love attacking that hate group 1 Million Moms. I love going after them. I love going after
the 1,000 moms. That's what I call them.
They're just they.
Sorry.
No,
you can't help it. It's a little shady, but seriously, they're not a million. They're not a million of those moms.
I think let's be a little bit fair. I think it's like 15,000, because I think the average amount of signatures. Yes, but either way, I love attacking them and going after them. And here's something from a guy's point of view that I love saying to people like that is, they like to quote the Bible and use religious, things like you were talking about before, and I'll end it on this. And one of the things about it is, because it's specifically the Old Testament. During the times of the Old Testament, one of the things, aside from all the other things they like to spout, is the fact that women at that time were lesser than men and really didn't have a place in society. So if you want to sit here and argue, the points of the Bible that we've evolved from, then let's go back to all the points from the Bible to where you have no right to even argue with me at all as a woman. And that argument pisses people off every time. And it's like, well, what I'm saying is wrong. It's 100% wrong. It's inaccurate. So if what I'm saying is inaccurate, why can't what you be inaccurate as well? And I've used that 100 times, and people just hate it when I say it. And I hate saying it because it's so sexist and it just makes me cringe saying it, but it's a valid argument.
Absolutely.
But they still don't want to believe anyway. So it's like, whatever.
Well, people are very, very, especially people of faith who are anti-LGBT. Not the people of faith who support us. They actually have a much better contextualized way to look at this, the way that you look at it, frankly. But the other folks are very, very good at compartmentalizing. Clearly, they've had to compensate to get through their lives like that, because, Phyllis Schlafly, for example, how did Phyllis Schlafly reconcile being usually anti-LGBTQ, right? I mean, horrifyingly anti-woman, and at the same time want to have an organization and be super public and very visible and an advocate? That goes against everything that she's arguing.
Yeah.
And have her husband let her do that, right? I mean, that's the interesting irony, is that, these folks one day, hopefully they will wake up and, smell the sexism. But right now, they haven't. And Cory Booker, as I said at the Senate hearing, did the very best job of talking about this. He's my senator, and it makes me very proud, because he said, I am sick and tired of seeing religion weaponized to attack people, whether it's to justify slavery, whether it's to justify not allowing Black people to have the vote, justifying not giving women the vote, justifying racism in many shapes and forms, sexism in many shapes and forms, and now homophobia and transphobia. I mean, yeah. And that's besides the fact that, honestly, like as we say, we have freedom of religion, we should actually probably also have freedom from religion if that's our choice.
Absolutely. Again, Cathy, I really appreciate you coming in.
Anytime.
And I will definitely want to have you back probably during June, during a Pride Month, and have some more conversations on this and other things.
Absolutely. Would love to. Really appreciate it. Great conversation.
Well, I really, truly appreciate it. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks, Derek.
All right,
Take care.
Bye-bye.